I was a teenager when Dance Into the Light, the album, came out. Maybe even wasn't a teenager. Maybe it was just before, a preteen, if you will. And I was much younger when Both Sides came out, and there was this weird time in my life. But I wasn't really on the bandwagon. I wasn't really tuned in, just being so young, especially pre-internet as well. So I remember coming across Both Sides CD in the record store, and I didn't know anything about it. And I didn't hear it. And then when Dance Into the Light came out, I remember a friend of mine's dad had the cassette in his car, and I was kind of intrigued because I heard It's in Your Eyes. And I think I'd been hearing that song on the radio, and I really liked it. And it reminded me of the Phil that I had grown up with. And anyway, the reason I'm saying that is that I do remember when I finally got a CD copy of Dance Into the Light, there was something in the liner notes. It's like, something like he said, you joked like, we used real drums this time. And I think it was like alluding to how Both Sides was kind of underwhelming for a lot of Phil fans because of the drum machines, or because of like the lack of, well, I think there were real drums on Both Sides too, but just the lack of like major production. And so there's this massive pendulum swing all the way back to Dance Into the Light, where we have a huge album with session musicians again, and the horns are back. And it sounds a lot more like Hanging Long Enough. Like it's basically him saying sorry. But anyway, I love Both Sides. I love But Seriously. And I do really love Dance Into the Light. And I love this song. This is probably my top 5 songs on this album. It's a really, really good album opener, one of his best album openers. It sounds like the rest of the record. It sounds really good. The drum patterns, I'm not crazy about that, but it's cool. It fits it. It fits the vibe. It's got that cruise ship vibe a little bit. Of all the tours I probably that I never got to see, or that I just missed out on based on my age and whatever, I think I would have liked to have seen the Dance Into the Light tour, or the Dance Around the World, or Live and Loose. The DVD is pretty cool. I think that looked really cool, looked really fun. I love the set list there. So I wish I had seen that tour. Let me know if you did. But I do really, really like this song. Now, remember when we talked to Harry Kim? He had said that Phil had done all these demos for Dance Into the Light, and that the band had got together in a country in Europe somewhere, or a city in Europe, I can't remember. And the idea was for them to practice them in a house or studio, and then go to a club and perform them live in a club in front of an audience, and either record that or somehow capture this live and loose feeling in the studio. I often wonder, if like Live and Loose was maybe like the album going to be album title. I don't know. It's basically the opposite of what Both Sides was. People, live, lots of cool stuff. And then Phil always has demoitis. He falls in love with his demos, and then he doesn't like to deviate from them. We know that on In the Air Tonight and so many other of his songs. And so it happened again. And Harry Kim told me that he just didn't like the sound of it, of the live feel. And they went back to the demos and kind of reined things in a little bit. The album is still great. But gosh, would I have loved to have heard something a little bit less polished, a little more rough around the edges, a little bit more like a live club feel to some of these songs. Could have been insane. It could have been insane.
So did you guys see this? This was really interesting, because in the world of Phil Collins and Genesis, there's not a lot of like new news that we don't already know about. And so this story broke it didn't break, but it was posted on this website or this newspaper called On Contact in early March of 2024. And it was a story about the recording of the album Dance Into the Light, and how Phil and the band rented out this chateau that was like, I don't know if it was somebody's home, I guess, or if it was like a hotel. If it at that point had been converted into a hotel, I think it's an Airbnb now. But they had rented it out, and they kind of kept it secret as to who was using this chateau for recording sessions and rehearsals. I think it was, remember when Harry Kim had talked about in my interview with him, he had talked about how they had planned to rehearse the songs and then to perform them in a nightclub. And even this article talks about performing some of the songs a couple nights. Anyway, it's just a really interesting article. You should go find it. Maybe I'll link it in the description. But it's just an interesting part of the story that I personally hadn't heard before. And there's a couple great photos. One of Phil with the homeowners, and then there's a picture of Phil with his drums set up out on the terrace, like out on the grass, and with a bunch of with mics as well. So I'd love to ask Hugh Padgham. I'd love to ask anybody who's familiar if any of those recordings of the drums outside made it onto the record. Drums don't sound very good outside, because a lot of like the sound that comes from a drum is the drums reflecting off of the room. That's why the stone room at the farm was so notorious, because it just augmented the sound of the drums. So when you hit a drum outside, there's just no reflections. And so it just dissipates instantly into the air. I mean, if the mics were close enough, it could sound okay, but I don't know. Dance Into the Light doesn't give me the vibe of like a outdoor lo-fi, drums written, played on the grass sound. Like it seems more, has more of a club sound to it. Anyway, so I'm not sure if those tracks were ever used, but it's a really interesting article, really great photos. I think Phil does mention it a little bit in his book, and the article refers to that. But I just think it's really good. It's really cool, and the photo is just incredible. That one photo I've never seen before. Phil playing his drums, wearing headphones. There's a whole recording equipment outside on the grass. You got to see it if you haven't already, and just adds to the story of Dance Into the Light a little bit, because this album was like, I don't know. I think it's an interesting album because it was his first album back after But Seriously, because both sides was like, both sides was kind of like reserved. It was kind of like a unique project in a weird way. And so this was like his big album with a band again, with horns and everything since But Seriously. So there's still, there would have been a lot of like hype and anticipation that this could be as big as But Seriously again. Of course, we know his time had kind of passed for pop, right? But anyway, the article is really cool. It just adds a little bit more details to Dance Into the Light, the album, which is something that's an album we just don't have a lot of information about.
But I really, really love this song. I have nothing negative to say about this song. Great opener. And let me know what you think about the song Dance Into the Light.